Today, we talk about a quiet night in Africa, one that changed everything. In the heart of Burkina Faso, under a pale moon, a convoy rolled through the dust. Guards watched closely. Inside the trucks were crates, sealed tight, filled with more than just shiny stones. Inside were 5.3 tons of rough diamonds, dug from the red earth of Burkina Faso, heading quietly toward Europe. But that night, the route stopped cold. Soldiers loyal to President Ibrahim Traoré intercepted the convoy. What looked like a simple seizure quickly became something much bigger, a political earthquake. Paris was furious. European media rang alarms. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, people began to cheer. For the first time in decades, something had shifted. The theft of Africa's riches had been interrupted, not by a court, not by the UN, but by a quiet, firm decision. These diamonds stay here. They belong to us. The man who made that decision wasn't waiting for permission. He wasn't negotiating. He was protecting something deeper than wealth. He was protecting dignity. Ibrahim Traoré didn't write a press release. He sent a message, and the people heard it. They filled the streets that night, not with fear, but with music, paint, and pride. They asked no questions about price. Instead, they asked, "Is this what sovereignty looks like?" Because this wasn't just about diamonds. It was about the right to say no, the right to keep what is yours, the right to decide your own future. And you, listening now, if you've ever wondered what freedom sounds like, maybe it sounds like this: a midnight convoy, stopped not with guns, but with conviction. Maybe it sounds like a people finally saying, "Enough." If your family ever sat around the radio wondering why Africa's name always came with struggle, tonight is different. This time, the name comes with courage. And maybe, just maybe, something new. The facts came slowly at first. A whisper here, a headline there. Then came the statement from the government. A secret convoy carrying 5.3 tons of unregistered diamonds had been intercepted just miles from the border. Its destination? Europe. Its origin? The mines of Burkina Faso. But who owned the diamonds? No one claimed them publicly. And that's when the questions started. This wasn't an accident. It was part of a pattern, a quiet, deliberate flow of wealth leaving the continent with no receipts and no return. The diamonds had no national stamp, no public accounting, and no legal manifest. But sources close to the investigation said something even more disturbing. The cargo was connected to foreign intermediaries linked to European companies, some with ties to Paris. In plain terms, this wasn't smuggling. It was extraction, disguised, routine, and protected. Until now. President Ibrahim Traoré had received the intel days earlier. He didn't call a press conference. He called a meeting. His intelligence chief, 2 trusted generals, and one simple instruction: stop the convoy. Quietly. No leaks, no mistakes, just results. And when the soldiers moved, they moved fast. No one was harmed. The diamonds were secured, and Traoré issued a single order: keep them in Burkina Faso. But the move sent shockwaves across continents. Within hours, the French Foreign Ministry issued a sharp statement, calling the act a hostile seizure of assets. French media painted Traoré as erratic. European leaders began talks of sanctions, economic pressure, even asset freezes. But inside Burkina Faso, the mood was entirely different. People celebrated, not because they suddenly had diamonds, but because, for once, something valuable wasn't taken from them. It was protected. In the capital, murals appeared overnight, giant diamonds wrapped in chains, now broken. One read, "Our land, our wealth, our future." Traoré stayed silent at first. He knew what was coming. Not just criticism, but retaliation. Diplomatic, financial, even covert. One advisor reportedly told him, "Mr. President, this will not be tolerated. There will be consequences." Traoré looked him in the eye and answered calmly, "We live with consequences every day. What we've never had is recovered dignity, and that we will not negotiate." That line spread like wildfire. In the markets, in classrooms, on local radio. A new phrase took root. The diamonds stayed home. It wasn't about jewelry. It was about justice. And the world noticed. Africa News ran the headline, 5.3 tons seized, France furious, Burkina Faso unmoved. But beneath the headline lay something deeper. For decades, Africa's mineral wealth has left by night and by silence. No debate, no resistance, just silence. Until now. Traoré's decision cracked that silence wide open. It wasn't just a policy move. It was a moral strike, and one that hit hard, because it exposed a question few in the West wanted to answer. How long has Africa been bleeding, and who kept it quiet? Behind closed doors in Paris, reports were flying. Economic analysts warned that if other African leaders followed Traoré's path, entire supply chains could collapse. Investors pulled back. Media firms received quiet guidance. Reframe the story. Focus on instability. But it was too late. The message had landed. A country ranked among the poorest in the world had done what no one expected. It said no. Not with protest, not with violence, but with action. And maybe that's why the story traveled so far. Because in a world full of noise, this was quiet strength. If you believe in the kind of leadership that doesn't wait for applause, think of a moment when someone in your family stood firm, not for wealth, but for honor. That's what this was. A stand, not for profit, but for peace of mind. And for once, the diamonds didn't leave. They stayed. And so did the hope. When the diamonds stayed home, the silence broke. The story moved quickly, from the back streets of Ouagadougou to the front pages in Paris. But the reactions were worlds apart. In Burkina Faso, people poured into the streets as if a war had ended with victory. They had no rifles, no weapons. They carried songs, paint, and pride. Murals appeared overnight, showing Traoré as a giant breaking chains. In his hands was not a gun, but the map of his nation, with the words, "No more leaving." In the markets, sellers hung small cloth banners that read, "Our resources, for our children." In schools, children invented a new game, "Protect the Diamonds." It was just a game, but it carried a dream, that for the first time, the treasures of their land would not vanish. In Europe, the reaction was starkly different. France recalled its ambassador. The foreign minister went on television declaring, "This act is a grave threat to international order." European lawmakers called for sanctions, asset freezes, and trade suspensions. News anchors called Traoré reckless, a leader playing a dangerous game with the West. But behind the words was something unspoken, fear, because this wasn't about one country anymore. It was a signal that an entire continent might be waking up. From Bamako to Conakry, young leaders, community groups, and even veteran fighters voiced their support. Burkina Faso is not alone, they said. In Accra, students held a rally called "Diamonds Must Stay." In Lagos, street artists painted Traoré next to Sankara and Lumumba, the faces of resistance reborn. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, President Traoré climbed a simple wooden stage in the nation's square. No music, no flag waving, just his voice. "Today," he declared, "those diamonds do not leave Africa. They belong to the people of Burkina Faso. And as long as I live, every stone, every drop of gold, every grain of soil, will remain here for our children. Or that the crowd froze in silence for a heartbeat. Then it erupted. Shouts of Traoré, Traoré filled the square. Old men wept. Children repeated his name as if it were a hymn. This was not just a speech. It was a vow. Across the halls of French government, anger turned to strategy. Officials drafted sanctions, searched for ways to pressure Burkina Faso through international bodies. A leaked memo read, "If not contained, this example could spread and destabilize key markets." But while Europe was preparing for diplomatic battle, a transformation was unfolding inside Burkina Faso. No orders were given, but neighborhoods formed self-defense committees. Women who once sold bread in the markets now handed out flyers. "We are not just fighting poverty, we are fighting erasure." Young artists painted walls across the capital, showing Traoré raising a diamond, held not as treasure, but as symbol. If you once believed only armies could defend freedom, maybe today changes that thought. Because sometimes freedom is not won by bullets, but by a clear voice, a decisive act, and a people willing to stand behind it. And if you remember the last time your own community went silent, not from fear, but from awe, then imagine the squares of Ouagadougou that night, where a whole nation held its breath, not in terror, but in hope. The day after the seizure, Burkina Faso did not wake up the same. Something had shifted. The diamonds were locked away, but their weight was now felt on every street, in every home. People knew retaliation was coming. The French Foreign Ministry had made it clear. Aid could be cut, accounts frozen, borders tightened. For a country already struggling with poverty, sanctions could mean hunger, shortages, and pain. But something unusual happened. Instead of panic, people began to organize. In working-class neighborhoods, families formed local committees. They didn't wait for government orders. They gathered food, they stored grain, they prepared for harder days. Farmers pledged part of their harvest to neighbors in need. Fishermen promised to share their daily catch. It was not wealth, but it was solidarity. In the markets, merchants started hanging signs. "Buy local, strengthen ourselves." Bread sellers gave discounts to soldiers on patrol. Tailors made shirts stamped with the phrase, "Our diamonds, our dignity." In the poorest districts, mothers who once worried about feeding their children began distributing handwritten leaflets. On them was a simple line, "Better to live with little but free than rich in diamonds but poor in dignity." That phrase, repeated from mouth to mouth, became a rallying cry. Radio stations picked it up. School teachers used it in lessons. Young people painted it on walls. Dignity had turned into the new currency. Inside government, the pressure was heavy. Ministers argued in tense meetings. Some whispered that the country could not survive without foreign aid, that compromise was needed. But Traoré held firm. On national radio, his voice carried a calm fire. "We do not starve because of diamonds. We starve because they are taken from us. If suffering comes, let it come with honor, because honor feeds the soul in a way hunger cannot destroy." His words hit deep. In the following weeks, ordinary people turned resilience into a movement. Artisans began selling handmade tools instead of imported goods. Community kitchens opened, feeding families with shared crops. In one village, elders organized night watches, saying, "We guard our land the way we guard our children." In another, school children planted gardens, telling reporters, "This is for tomorrow, so we don't depend on others." But the shadow of fear was real. Business owners feared contracts would be canceled. Bankers whispered about accounts being frozen abroad. Parents worried that medicine would run out. And yet, a strange strength filled the air. Because for once, the choice was theirs, not forced from outside, but chosen from within. Analysts abroad said Burkina Faso was risking collapse. Commentators in European capitals called it arrogance. But in Ouagadougou, many felt something different, like a nation finally standing upright after years of bending low. And as the days passed, neighboring countries watched carefully. Some leaders feared the example, others admired it quietly. In Mali and Niger, youth groups held small rallies in solidarity. If Burkina can resist, why not us? They asked. The idea was spreading, not as fire, but as a seed. In church gatherings and Friday prayers, voices rose together. Prayers for strength, prayers for survival, prayers for dignity. For many families, the question was no longer whether the diamonds were worth it. The question was whether freedom itself could be measured in price. If you ever remember your parents telling you, "We must sacrifice today for a better tomorrow," then you will understand the spirit in Burkina Faso at that moment. People were ready to endure, ready to share, ready to stand. Not for diamonds, but for something deeper, control of their own future. While Burkina Faso was filled with pride, the outside world was trembling in a different way. In Paris, smoke-filled meeting rooms turned into battlegrounds. French officials debated fiercely. Freeze assets, cut aid, impose sanctions. One leaked report even suggested launching information campaigns to divide Burkina Faso's public opinion, to weaken confidence in Traoré. The European Union moved quickly. Lawmakers in Brussels argued late into the night. Some demanded to teach Traoré a lesson. Others warned that punishing Burkina Faso too harshly might set the whole Sahel region on fire. But in the end, most agreed. Economic pressure had to be applied. Across the Atlantic, Washington began to watch closely. Analysts didn't name France directly, but the warning was clear. If Burkina Faso succeeds, other nations will follow. That could disrupt global strategic interests. International financial institutions, including the IMF and the World Bank, stayed officially silent. But behind the scenes, whispers spread of a diplomatic ultimatum, a demand that Burkina Faso hand the diamonds over to a so-called Global Stabilization Fund. Meanwhile, in Africa, the story carried a very different tone. From Bamako to Dakar, from Conakry to Lagos, young people marched with banners. If Burkina stands, Africa stands. In Ghana, young politicians openly praised Traoré, calling him the man who dared to break the silence. European media outlets portrayed Burkina Faso as reckless, unstable, dangerous. But Africa News offered another frame. For the first time in decades, one nation has openly confronted the network of mineral plunder. For Americans watching from afar, the question was quieter, but no less important. If France is this angry, will the United States back its ally, or recognize that a stronger, more independent Africa is emerging? If you've ever sat with your family watching the evening news and wondered, why does this matter to us? This may be the answer. Because sometimes a single decision in Ouagadougou can ripple across oceans, reshaping alliances, rewriting policies, and reminding us that even a convoy of diamonds can ignite a global storm. As the dust settled, it became clear that the diamonds were only the beginning. The real battle was not for stones, but for sovereignty. Burkina Faso had drawn a line in the sand, and the world was forced to take notice. But drawing that line came with a cost. In the weeks after the seizure, reports of foreign pressure mounted. A joint letter, signed by several European nations and backed by international financial bodies, demanded that Burkina Faso surrender the 5.3 tons of diamonds to a global stabilization fund. The message was sharp: comply or face harsher sanctions, border closures, and shortages of vital goods. Inside the presidential palace, ministers argued with worry. "Mr. President," one pleaded, "rejecting this could mean economic collapse. Our people may go hungry." Traoré paused, then spoke with fire in his voice. "We have known hunger for generations. What we have not known is the right to decide our own destiny. This is not a choice between hunger and comfort. It is a choice between kneeling and standing tall." The room fell silent. Some looked at him with fear, others with admiration, but everyone understood that a turning point had been reached. Outside, the people responded not with despair, but with resilience. Farmers began storing grain for leaner months. Fishermen shared their catch more widely. In villages, elders told young men, "Protect the land as you protect your children." Women in the poorest neighborhoods organized soup kitchens, feeding neighbors from shared pots. On the walls of Ouagadougou, new graffiti appeared: "Our diamonds, our dignity, our future." Meanwhile, France grew more desperate. Reports surfaced of covert plans, attempts to fund opposition figures, stir unrest, even sabotage infrastructure. Yet each time, the people rallied tighter around their president. A leaked headline from Africa News put it plainly: "Foreign plots fail, people hold firm." Then came the revelation that changed everything. Documents leaked from an African summit showed that part of the diamond cargo had been tied not only to European operations, but also to networks of corruption across several African capitals. Suddenly, Traoré was no longer seen as just a rebel leader defying the West. He was a whistleblower exposing a system of theft. Across Africa, leaders scrambled to respond. Some were shaken, others emboldened. Ordinary people felt vindicated. What they had long suspected was now undeniable. At a special summit in Ouagadougou, Traoré spoke with calm determination. "These diamonds are not mere stones. They are the reflection of a history of plunder. Today, we say enough. Burkina Faso does not seek revenge. It seeks justice. And justice means that Africa must control its own resources." For a long moment, the hall stayed silent. Then slowly, heads began to nod. Even leaders who had remained quiet now whispered their agreement. Some proposed turning the seized diamonds into a shared African fund for education and health. For the first time in years, unity felt possible. Around the world, reactions shifted. Latin American and Asian commentators compared Traoré's stance to great liberation struggles of the past. Even skeptical voices in Western media admitted, "This is more than economics. This is a moral strike against exploitation." Back in Burkina Faso, the streets were alive with pride. Children wore shirts with their president's face. Old women cried, saying, "We never thought we would see this day." And across Africa, one phrase began to echo: "If Burkina Faso resists, Africa will awaken." Still, dangers remain. France and its allies continue to push back. Economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, even covert actions. None of these threats have vanished. The question is no longer just about diamonds. It is about whether a small nation can stand against giants and inspire others to rise. So what comes next? Will Ibrahim Traoré's bold stance hold firm, or will the pressure eventually break Burkina Faso? Will other African nations join this wave, or retreat in fear? And how will the United States, caught between its alliances and the reality of a changing Africa, choose to respond? If this story reminds you of times when your family gathered around the evening news, wondering who would stand for justice, then ask yourself, what would dignity look like in your own life tonight? If you have ever prayed for peace in a troubled land, consider lifting a prayer now, for strength, for wisdom, for courage in Burkina Faso. If you believe the truth should be shared even when it makes the powerful uncomfortable, then carry this story to someone you respect. Because in the end, the greatest diamond was never in a crate or a convoy. It is in the will of a people who refuse to bow. and that will, once awakened, cannot be taken away. Burkina Faso has spoken, Africa has stirred, and the world, whether ready or not, must listen.